Thank you very much, Dr. Ejeta. That was an incredible, very inspiring talk. I'm still soaking that all in. We'll quickly introduce the panel and then ask some questions up here, and then there'll be an opportunity for questions from the audience. My name is John Vendeland. I work as I'm a founding partner of an agricultural technology consulting group. I'm also working as an adjunct professor teaching an agricultural class here at Wheaton. So had the privilege of interacting with many of you in the audience who are actually required to be here tonight, so that helps. It's a great honor to sit up here with this group for a whole bunch of reasons, and just a pleasure to introduce them. I'd like to just, Dr. Ejeta has already been introduced, so no need to repeat that, but well, no, actually, there may be somebody visiting, so I'll read, but Paul, who needs no introduction to most of you, but it's still a great story, so I just wanted to go through it. He joined Wheaton College as the director of the Hunger Program and a professor of history in the fall of 1999. Going all the way back, he was raised the son of missionary parents in the Congo. He graduated from DePauw University and completed a PhD in African history at Northwestern. Prior to coming to Wheaton in 1999, Paul had spent 22 years in Kenya in cross-cultural education and was involved professionally with issues of development and cultural change. He's married to Margie, and they have 3 grown children. Paul directs the Hunger Program here and has taught several of Hunger's core courses over the years. Paul's vision is that in teaching and equipping students for global holistic Christian service, the Hunger Program will truly be responsive as servants to the vision of our many host partners as develop initiatives to meet the challenge faced by the people whom they serve. Next to Paul is Dr. Mwenda Ntarangwi. Mwenda is an associate professor of anthropology at Calvin College, where he also serves as executive director of the International Association for the Promotion of Christian Higher Education. And he's also associate director of off-campus programs. Mwenda holds a doctorate in anthropology from the University of Illinois, and both a master's degree in Swahili Cultural Studies and a Bachelor of Education degree from Kenyatta University in Kenya. Besides Calvin College, which he joined in January of 2008, he has worked for Kenyatta University, Egerton University also in Kenya, St. Lawrence University in New York, Agostana College in Illinois, and Indiana Wesleyan University. He's the author of peer-reviewed books on such diverse topics as African popular music, practice of anthropology in African Christianity, and numerous journal papers and book chapters. One of the favorite things I read about Mwenda was a quote actually from the dean there at Calvin College, which really struck me. It said that Mwenda excels at helping students use anthropology to understand both themselves and others. I thought that was a beautiful commentary. Finally, here at my left, also well known to many of you, is Dr. Kristen Page. She's a professor of biology at Wheaton College, where she teaches courses including ecology, parasitology, and a very popular public health and nutrition. She's a disease ecologist who's interested in changes in disease transmission as a function of land use. Currently, she's developing strategies to mitigate disease risk in urban areas using a nematode model. Dr. Page is actively involved in the Hunger Program, and she enjoys her work in mentoring and visiting interns, and heard many stories about this. So anyway, it's a wonderful group and really marked by a real love of young people and a real dedication to investing lives in education and encouragement. It just really comes through, so it's a privilege to be here. I wanted to start off with just one general question. And from what, and you can answer this in any order, but from what you've heard over the last day and a half through the plenary addresses, the panels, breakout sessions, what do you think audience members, whether you're students, faculty, visiting parents, or community members, what should they take away from this symposium? What is sort of that bottom line for you? Go ahead. I'll have to pick somebody here.
Thank you. It's such an honor to be here, to, first of all, see students trying to articulate what they learned in 6 months, about less than an hour of a chapel service, and yet leave us so powerfully moved and seeing how God can be mysterious in many places and in our lives. It's that. And for me, I hope that students leave here seeing that life is about stories. And we tell stories, we hear stories, but those stories have context. And when we are responding to human needs through the resources that we have, that we pay attention to those stories. I was quite captivated to see the stories that students presented today at chapel, and also the stories that our speakers have given us of how they've come to a place where they've come to professionally, and yet still asking those very basic questions of how can we make a difference. And it came back to what are the stories of the people that we're trying to work with? What do they want out of it? I've also seen that what we do in the work that Alyssa has been presented in these panels is that we are mostly talking about change that is about improving what is already there. And we are always reminded that God is already there. We should seek and see what He is already doing with who in the community. And if we are paying attention, we'll find those glimpses, and it's through those that I think we're able to make a difference. If we do not tweak what is already there, I think as Dr. Ejeta has said, we end up not having that adoption of new technology because we're trying to impose something on them. So what is the story? What are they saying? What are they already doing? How can we improve on it?
Well, I'm not sure that I can say anything any better than that. That was right on target. I came away just amazed by all of the stories of hope and all of the potential. And I hope that the students that I have and currently and my past students and anyone who is here would leave here empowered to listen, and not just empowered to do, but empowered to listen and understand where they fit into the stories, as you mentioned. How do we empower others to use what they already have? And if we could be an advocate in our place of power, then we can hopefully, by listening, figure out what that might look like. So I'm very hopeful because there's a lot of potential out there. But Dr. Ejeta's last slide was very, very powerful, because I think that's the biggest hope is in the children that are there, and their wonderful minds, and there's somehow, by us listening, maybe we can help facilitate a change in the way that they can receive education and contribute to feeding the world.
I think for me, it comes down to a question I hope that what I really want students to leave here, want anyone to leave here with tonight, is somehow a sense of hope in spite of the enormity of the challenges ahead of us. I think most of you know that I teach third world issues, and probably students go out of there with a great sense of despair, or possible despair, at the size of the problems. All those graphs and charts and global maps and whatnot that Dr. Ejeta shared with us a few minutes ago are sort of standard for third world issues. They are what drive our world. They're what give us a sense. I mean, we think of a number of, 1 billion people, or 2 billion, and less than $1 a day, chronic hunger. And we look at these challenges and whatnot. The tendency is to come away from this saying, there's nothing I can do about this. This is overwhelming. And yet I think, at the other hand, the stories that we've heard and the experiences and the lives of people like Dr. Ejeta, like Stan Dorr, like Roger Thoreau, like so many others who are with us, Paul McNamara and others, are people who are doing something in the context of this, being faithful to their callings, to their gifts, to their passions, to the skills that they have brought to this, with all of the diversity of that. And to me, that's what hope is all about. As you see the pictures of women in Western Kenya with their backs bent over, hoeing in a small farm, you realize that people are making an effort, using what gifts they have, what skills they have, what resources they have. And so somehow this is a shared planet, this is a shared situation. The numbers seem overwhelming, but I hope that somehow with these stories, we also come away with hope. We also come away with a conviction that this is a planet that we share and that we need to be involved in its future. It is a planet, those of you who are students or recent alumni, you are inheriting. So it's a planet that you have a great deal of responsibility to take care of and to be a part of. So hope.
I don't have much to add. The only thing I wanted to say was something that I noticed here that I hadn't seen anywhere else in how you run the program that I think has impressed me, and that is particularly when you take kids from sheltered homes and the care you take in making those arrangements and identify places for them to go and have an experience. That care is important. But I was impressed by the fact that you take time over weeks or months, I don't know, by preparing those kids for this assignment. And then being part of them through sending faculty and working with others to be with them, at least in contact. But more importantly, the time that you spend with them after they get here so that they can soak that up and exchange views and culminate with the service at the chapel today is an extremely careful way of doing it. And so it's just wonderful because it is so easy to underestimate the shocks that these kids feel and the effect that has on them, but trying to process it with them so that it becomes the kind of positive response that you just described requires that kind of careful care and handling that you seem to be doing. I don't know if I had heard or seen of any program that does that in their study abroad programs or anything, because that's wonderful care.
Great. The microphones are open if there's any of you that would like to come forward with questions. So as you come up, we'll jump in. One technical question, I can't help myself being an ag person, but one of many great achievements of Dr. Ejeta was really the first sorghum hybrid in Africa, a gene Dura 1. And I was just wondering if you could comment for a few minutes on the importance of open germplasm exchange and how difficult would it be to do that today in today's environment?
Just quickly, what the work entailed was drought tolerance is an important attribute for crop varieties that are used by farmers. And the crop that I worked with, sorghum, is genetically inherently drought tolerant. And so the work that I did was to give it more drought tolerance through a technology called hybrid sorghum. And a very simple technology, but the reason why I chose that and why I think it was successful, it really goes to this development in this country about hybrid varieties, where hybrid maize started. For nearly 200, not 200, maybe about 150 years or so. When maize farming in this country, the yield levels were like this, flat. Until the discovery of genetics at the turn of the century and the discovery of the hybrid concept. And in 1930s, when the first hybrid corn was developed, the yield results were flat. This new technology developed in the 1930s. And then a man by the name Wallace, Henry Wallace, in Iowa, working with Iowa State, envisioned the fact that the farmers are going to need seed supply on a regular basis to benefit from this technology. And then he said, it needs care because it's science-based and somebody has to produce seed. He became a seed producer. He was from the community. He knew that would serve the community. And it's one of those situations where he knew he can do well while at the same time doing good with this community. He started that. That was really the foundation for the development of the agro-industry complex in this country, where agriculture, the biggest agriculture revolution in the world was that technology. That changed the world, and that was the knowledge and experience because Norm Borlaug was a young kid growing in Iowa that he picked that up. And then he went to India and brought the Green Revolution to Asia. That lesson I took to heart. And it was that kind of experience using an indigenous crop, sorghum, developing the sorghum hybrid, the first sorghum hybrid in Africa, and then using that to develop the same kind of agricultural services for seed development, for marketing, and so on in Sudan, and that the World Food Prize recognized on what I'd done. In the follow-up question, you said, what has changed today? What has changed is, until 1985, any seed company could develop a variety, while their variety, their investment is protected, but other plant breeders can utilize that variety and produce another variety. So it didn't stop researchers from using that. But in 1985, when the Utility Patent Act was changed, it made it impossible for others to use somebody's patented variety to utilize it and bring about new revolution. But today I say that with all the revolutions that we'd seen in agriculture, I really truly believe that that innocent revolution that started in the 1930s was the most remarkable agricultural advancement in human society today.
John, may I take a...
Sure.
Here. Whoops, sorry. What Dr. Ejeta is just talking about is something that's actually been sort of in the back of my mind through this whole symposium. And really is not far from my mind in when we have all of these kinds of conversations, and when it really, we're talking about poverty, we're talking about the poor, we're talking about the differences between rich and poor, between places that are included in sort of the in increasing wealth and whatnot, and those who are not. And it just really strikes me, and what my friend was saying a few minutes ago was the possibilities and the dreams of increasing productivity and making the world a better place. It seems to me like that, and just in getting to know Dr. Ejeta this weekend a little bit, and reading his story, and also seeing the results of the work that he's doing, is increased ability of farmers to grow food to feed their kids, their families. And it is good. The challenge is when we human beings decide to turn what are good motives and good practices and good ideas into something that we can control and that we can use for our own benefit to the exclusion of others. And so the ultimate end of what starts out as a tremendously almost a humanitarian effort, but it also has good business practices, is you end up with things like terminator genes, which absolutely then prevent people from using technologies in order to basically keep that to ourselves, to hoard it, to control it, so that farmers are basically tied to that. And whether that's a good example or not, it seems to me that what we need is a revolution in values. We need to think outside of those boxes that basically benefit us at the expense of benefiting somebody else. Not that it's not good to benefit, but if we benefit at the expense of others intentionally, then I think we're on dangerous ground. So I think if we're going to really address the questions of poverty and hunger, we've got to think structurally. And I think inherent, I'm putting words in your mouth, inherent in your address tonight, is that science is a tremendous foundation. We've got to think beyond that, because science in itself, without some of these other sort of understandings of the changes that we need in our own values as human beings, those really need to come together in ways that benefit all of us. Just a thought.
Okay.
Good evening. My name is Josh. I'm a junior here. This is sort of a follow-up to that question then, I guess, but it's mainly for Dr. Ejeta, but I'd love to hear anyone else's opinion. In your opinion, what is the role of genetic engineering or genetically modified organisms? And your answer that science and technology is essential to empowerment, introduction, and hunger. And then a second part of that question is, what changes do you think need to be made to intellectual property right laws for those to be effective?
I am of the opinion of all of science provides opportunities to solve problems. And society needs to decide what problem requires what kind of solution. And based on that, if you ask me, there are a lot of problems that are out there in developing country agriculture that we can address with conventional science. But there could develop some problems that would require more sophisticated science. And when that arises, community, society needs to decide whether that is the science for them. And the inherent use of molecular biology, that is a basis upon which genetically modified organisms are created, is really an extremely powerful tool that is used very readily in health, in designing new medicine, and so on. And so it's just an extremely powerful tool. What brought about the chasm between the people that supported and those against with GMOs is the fact that the particular gene under transfer could come from any source, meaning to say you can bring a gene from bacteria and insert it in a plant and it provides some kind of solution or protection against something. And so that alarmed people, and then there was whether it was a philosophical or a political or economic division, a division was created between Europe and North America. North Americans said it's okay, Europeans said no. And their rationale, the reason they gave was more of a philosophical, ethical question. Americans say, no, there really is not an ethical question. It's more of an economic argument. In the process, what Roger was talking about when two elephants fight is the grass that is being hurt, is that the argument is at that level, but Africans got caught in between. And so I say, what a mistake that was. I think it was a calculated decision for advancing the GMO agenda by industry, but it really was counterproductive, because I wish the advance and the promotion was for science and technology at large. Then let the communities and society decide what kind of science tools that you want to use to solve the problem. And so that's the first part of your question. The second question about the intellectual protection is that it happens around the world with all kinds of investments. And so what was really a game-changing fact was this 1985 Utility Patent Act. Until 1985, engineering technology, all other technologies were allowed to patent, but not agricultural or biological technologies. So the companies began to invest readily because they saw an opportunity to invest in agricultural technologies. When that happened, they found that they needed some way to invest, to protect their investments. And so 1985, the game changed, but it made for a very difficult scenario for agriculture to exchange germplasm and utilize opportunities for improvement. And so I'm not very supportive of that, and I say that in public, but at the same time, I am not sure we have a lot of room to go back on, because that has been promulgated then, and it would be very difficult. If that happens, then there won't be any private sector investment, because they have no way of protecting the investment they make. You know, when the investments are very heavy and billions of dollars, and so they were trying to get a way to get protection for their investments. And so I don't know if we have any options along those lines. But at the same time, if you connect the two responses I gave you, there is plenty of science left out there to continue to address the problems we have. And just because that GMO technology is not available for the rest of the world is really not a huge loss.
Thank you.
Others want to comment on that? Or?
I don't. It's beyond me.
Hi. Hello. I'm in an economic growth and development class where we've talked a lot about how some economists believe that technological advances, and I believe this applies to agricultural advances as well, can destroy a lot of jobs or take away from jobs, therefore causing a lot of development experts, or I guess development people, to encourage inferior aid or inferior technological aid. And kind of where's the balance between when is it okay to encourage inferior aid because it's more accessible, it's more financially possible or feasible, and then also, you know, earlier today, I believe it was talking about kind of agricultural extension, and this is technologically great, but it's also very expensive, and these, I don't know, technologies are what the West is using, and then how is advancing Western technology in the rest of the world, where does that become ethnocentric, and assuming that Western or small farmers, for example, adopting these technologies will work for their different paradigms. So where's that balance between advancing, you know, the best practices for these small farmers, for example, but then also acknowledging that often those best practices are the most expensive and least feasible?
No takers here?
I'll take it. I'm not a technical person, but I think the issue is how do we produce what we call appropriate technology. I think we saw a speaker who had that corn shelling little tool, and again, that's what I was talking about, context. It's common for us to want to just move this technology that has worked here and say it can work here. I think it's a big mistake to think that way. Again, there's also the idea of multi-sectoral work where you combine different sectors, and that's what I've heard all over, is that there's no one department that can actually handle this. It has to be a more holistic, multi-sectoral approach to solving those problems. So if it's shelling corn, there's something that might work for the women in Western Kenya that may not work for people in Southeast India. And so appropriate technology, I think, for me, my lay person's approach would be the best solution.
If I may give a quick response to that, is that part of the reason why I really continually hammer this, and I do this everywhere I go, about building local capacity, is that the solution to the problem becomes very powerful when you involve local communities who understand the local problems to develop the solutions, okay? And so, but very often with the modern technical assistance programs that we have, we sit here and think about the problems. We go visit for a week and we become experts about those problems and come here, sit down and come up with better and better solutions. And so the thinking is, if we could only figure it out, only if we could get the answer, the problems would be solved. And I say, not really. I think you're going to go through several iterations to adopt those technologies. And so the earlier an understanding went into defining the problem and coming up with the solutions, and that greater likelihood being greater if the locals were involved in the process, and particularly well-trained men and women from the local communities are involved in interacting with the local communities to finding the solution, the greater the likelihood of solving it once and for all. And so I just can't overemphasize the need for enhancing capacity building and building institutions in developing countries, because that is the most lasting contribution that you could make in making things better for developing countries.
Hi, good evening. I direct my question to anyone, basically, who has expertise to answer it. Our government and governments around the world devote a significant amount of their resources to developing ethanol and biofuels. So my question is that as we continue to use more land to develop, say, corn or sugarcane to feed that need, are we sort of losing sight of the goal of feeding the world for the sake of having these eco-friendly fuels in North America, basically?
Great question. I assume I'm likely to be asked to respond. It really is a great ethical question. Humanity is facing that, and today, I want to be very realistic. That in the last 5 years, agriculture had received a much greater and positive image than we had 10 years ago. Agriculture was taken for granted. Food was dirt cheap in the wealthy countries. And investments in agriculture research was very low. And two things happened that really changed the game. One was the 2007-2008 food price crisis. All of a sudden, we realized, with the kind of scenario that I'm talking about, realizing all the challenges that we're facing, that this kind of crisis that rocked the world could happen over and over again and disrupt our civilization and disrupt the stability and peace around the world. The second thing that happened was this idea of the energy demand and therefore the need for alternative energy, and brought opportunities to farmers in the Midwest, okay, to generate biofuel. But the reality now, what people have realized is that we got to think this through. What would that mean in terms of natural resource conservation, the biodiversity, the kind of issues you raise? So I just want to tell you that a lot of powerful people are thinking this through, how sustainable this is over a long term. The unfortunate thing that happened was they were going to prime the system for alternative energies using through biofuels. but then move to biomass-based, plant-based fuel generation. But the technology for that is not as advancing as it was expected to be. I am extremely supportive of the idea of alternative energy because relying on non-renewables is not a way to go. But that, again, I go back to the same solution for the problems that I see, and that is we need to advance the science and the technology to come up with alternative ways to meet that challenge we have. And burning grain for years to come is not likely to do it.
I think a subsidiary sort of question, or at least an issue to your question, is I totally agree that we need to think about and really understand the science and technology aspects of those, of that issue. I think we also need to really very, very carefully think about what it is that we're producing and why, and how does that affect the whole system. When I look at some of the countries in the region that I spent much time and grew up in East Africa, it's no accident to me that people are going hungry in the same places where the best land is used for cash crops. That smallholder farmers in Kenya are earning an income through coffee and tea and other, in the best lands in Kenya, while the food producers are being pushed to ever more marginal lands. I see that happening over and over again in countries throughout the region. And so what is our luxury and what we can afford to pay $4 or $5 a cup for, which can in some cases help small farmers, in many cases is also contributing to a food production shortage because food production is moved to ever more marginal areas. I came to sort of begin to teach about development in 1984-85. And one of the ironies for me at the time was under the regime of Mengistu Haile Mariam in Ethiopia. Ethiopia was funding the war against Somalia in the Ogaden with coffee earnings that were exported to, or that were basically exchanged to the Soviet Union for arms. At the same time, 3 million Ethiopians, primarily in the northern districts, were dying. Were basically facing famine. These are the kinds of incongruities and the kinds of questions that we need to bring together. They're the questions that you are going to have to ask. What is the world that you want to live in? What is the world that you are willing to live in? What is a just and equitable world for us and for those who produce?
Hello. Okay, I wasn't sure if it would pick me up. I just want to preface this by saying, sorry, this is not going to be a short question. All right, so I spent my hunger internship in rural Uganda, and my question comes out of that. One of the biggest dynamics I noticed for small-scale farmers and for agriculture in general was a social movement into the cities in response to the difficulties of farming there and of rural life in general there. This I've noticed is either as a movement of the whole family, or maybe just the family head going to live in the city and then providing monetary funds for the family working in the city, or for youth. I was teaching at a school, so I interact with a lot of youth, for whom working in the city was seen as necessary for social mobility and for prosperity. But the overall thing I feel like I saw was this you could say almost this urban narrative that was becoming very, very common among the people where I was, where moving into the city was the way in which somebody bettered their life. There was social mobility, economic prosperity, and things like that. And when I came to here, the first thing I was struck by was the way in which, people who are really interested in talking about rural agricultural inputs, on the ground, that's actually not what people were asking. People were wanting to get out. And it's a very different conversation, at least on the ground where I was. I suspect other places, I was in a pretty arid place, so maybe the agriculture sucked or something. But how do you think such a shift will affect the societies in the global south and small-scale farming? Also, how can we integrate the rural and urban narratives that seem to be in conflict
And then the last question, like, how does this affect our conversations about food resource and ecological issues that we've been talking about, that you've been talking about for quite some time, and we've been talking about this for the last 2 days?
No, thank you for asking that question. The reason for my thanking you is that was one of the points I wanted to make and I didn't. And that is, no, it's a great question, because, you know, on one hand, I spoke about a large number of students going to college. And one of the issues that are arising out of that is number of students that are graduating from college. And who is going to employ those? And so a source for that needs to be developed at the same time. One of those untapped opportunities for employment is exactly the same thing that you're raising. Because until now, with the kind of drudgery that smallholder farmers felt, urban migration, as you said, was a ticket out of that drudgery. You want to get out of there. And so if we are serious about advancing smallholder agriculture, one of the things that need to happen is to make smallholder farming the kind of business young men and women would want to get into. But that is going to require a totally changed mindset by policymakers. It's not, you know, your grandfather's smallholder farming. Now you're talking about bringing knowledge and technology and bringing, you know, dynamic, driven young men and women to come and make a living out of that. The farmers of the United States in the 1920s and 30s didn't have a lot of education, but these were highly motivated people that really wanted to make it go and succeeded. We need to create that kind of dynamism to smallholder farming. And that's with that kind of bright minds coming into the business of farming, you change the game. You change the game because the ingenuity that would come would get into, they would be talking about processing something locally and making a side business and generating local employment then and stopping that urban migration. That's one way of changing the game to make smallholder farmer contribute to feeding the world. It was a point I had in mind to say, and thank you. And so that really changed also the integration, because instead of running to urban, when there are, you know, all kinds of industry being formed within the community, then the community is likely to thrive, and you don't have to run away from the way of life that you're deeply connected with, and you could still stay there, provided that there would be opportunities for education, for hospital and clinics and things like this that are basic needs for why people would move away from isolated areas of rural Africa.
Hi, again. I want to thank you again, Dr. Ejeta, for your comments this evening, for your commendations for our hunger program and our students and the faculty and staff who help us think through these issues. As a scientist, you're well acquainted with the STEM fields, and I was particularly moved and share your concern about the education. And for an example, let's stay with Ethiopia. With the deficits in education, how should we as educators be stimulating and challenging our students to enter the education system? And I love what you've said about, you know, the NGOs have got to work themselves out of business. So how should students be thinking about the STEM fields? And are the STEM fields an opportunity to boost the educational system of Ethiopia, for instance, at every single level, so that students could go and teach at the elementary level, middle school, high school, and the university levels? How should our students be thinking about that? Thanks.
Thank you very much. It is not only Ethiopia. You and I were talking about expansion of education in East Africa, in Africa in general. And so this expansion of opportunities in various areas have emerged. Education is not only in Ethiopia, in many African countries. The more positive things that I had seen happen in the last maybe 7 years, two things that are really positive on the balance. One is this expansion of education, and the other one is infrastructure development. Lots of road building, almost every African country in the last 7 years or so. And with that, with the infrastructure, I don't see a lot of negative, except more is needed. But the education is really a huge problem. And it's something that many of us Africans are continually thinking about. And the only solution that emerges in my mind as a way to address this problem is strengthening the faculty capacity in many of these countries. And the best way to do that is there is not going to be source of funding and support to bring a large number of Africans to Africa to meet that demand. But I think I have been a beneficiary of American education, not only through the graduate education that I received in this country. The college in my country that I graduated from was established by Oklahoma State University through the old program that President Truman put in place to strengthen institutions in developing countries. And so American universities went to various countries. Purdue went to Brazil, Illinois went to India, and places like that, started an agricultural college, truly advancing the concept of the tripartite functions of a land-grant university system in this country. That one college in Ethiopia, to this day, even though Ethiopia had gone through a lot of turmoil through the times of communism and so on, still contribute very positively to the advancement of the country, however slow that advancement has been. And so what I am recommending as I interact with my colleagues in other universities is to establish a sister university relationship, where a university in the developed world would form a relationship. We may not be able to send faculty for a long term as we used to. When Oklahoma State picked up alumni, the faculty would go turn by turn, spend 2 years over there. Times have changed. The lifestyles of people have changed. There are spouses with other employment and so on. That doesn't work anymore. But there is no reason why we can't come up with creative mechanisms for building a relationship for faculty to spend short time, particularly senior or graduate students and so on, spending over there. That would enhance the quality of these educational programs. At least at the tertiary education level, I can think of reasonable ways of how that can be done. Trying to teach in elementary education and so on, it's going to require the kind of committed individuals that may want to do that, because the accommodations, infrastructure, and the logistics may not be supported. But really enhancing tertiary education, I can't see any other alternative to do it over a short period of time other than linking with strong universities in other lands and working with them. And so with the diversity and large number of universities we have in this country, even if few of them would do it, would enhance educational advancement and quality improvement in many of the African universities.
Yeah, Christian, I'm sorry, we're right up against the wire on time, and we wanted to give Paul a few minutes. This is his last time on stage here, so let you finish up, Paul.
Well, I guess mine is simply to close this symposium, our 8th symposium, and it has been an incredible journey over the last 8 years. Thinking back to our first symposium where we had host partners from every continent here, when we had Dr. Vinay Samuel come from Oxford and from India to share with us his understanding of where development theory and practice had come over the preceding sort of 30 or 40 years. And at that time, we talked about development, we talked about transformation, we talked about transformational development, we talked about the way that our development, our understanding of this whole sort of word of development had changed from over the previous 4 decades. And we decided at that first symposium that we would talk about the concept of development as simply being neighbor. Rather than anything else, is that we're entering into a global world in which we are all connected. And if we could begin to think about transformation, not only as transformation of others elsewhere, but also understanding anew our own world and our own situation, our own involvement with the world, and becoming neighbor to one another, we just might begin to get things right, because we need to treat our neighbors as ourselves. And of course, that's the second of the great commandments. And then over the succeeding 7 years, we had the Heifer Project here come and talk about their efforts. We've had a session on global health. We had a session on land tenure shared with us by Dr. Aklilu Dalelo from the University of Addis Ababa. We brought other organizations in with us last year. We talked about our neighbors, both domestic and international, with Dr. David Beckman, the president of Bread for the World. We have had a great time and really good conversations. What are the outcomes? You know, I really, as I see alumni from the last 7 or 8 years and before, going back a very long time, I think that we are beginning to really make some progress. Progress is a funny word, but I think we're being faithful to the time that we're living. I think we're being faithful to a world that we're beginning to understand better. And I think that's drawn in part because of our commitment to listening to the voices from other places, as Mwenda said, to listen to those stories that we are hearing. So it's no longer, thankfully, responding to needs somewhere else by simply the old story about the fish in the pond and the fishermen and whatnot. It's no longer about giving a fish. It's no longer even about teaching somebody else to fish. It's maybe a little bit more about sort of who has access to the pond, realizing that we've had greater access to the pond than others, and maybe it's about sharing the pond. It's figuring out how do we share equitably the pond. And I think for those of us in this country, those of us who have benefited for so long, and Ryan and I were talking about this not too long ago, maybe it's becoming vegan and protecting the pond and the fish so that others also can have some of it. What I'm trying to say is here that our response may be, first of all, to look at our own situation and look at our own contribution to world inequalities and to the changes that are happening in our environment. What Dr. Ejeta was sharing with us tonight is who consumes most, who uses the most energy and whatnot, and realize that all of those, as we talked, as Roger talked to us last night, require much more than this planet can give us. And so somehow it's about how we live together as neighbor and how we share what God has given us, and how we share about that for our own, perhaps not development, but perhaps it's our own flourishing as humanity, as creation of all living creatures and beings and whatnot, but also as our planet itself. And I think that's the task ahead of you. That's not a task for those who are easily daunted. It's not a task. It's not something. I don't think it's even overwhelming. I think it's exciting. And so I hope that you go from here with an excitement and a vision, and saying, I want to be a part of this. And this is a world that we are going to live in. It's a world that we are going to bequeath to those who follow us, and we want to be a part of this. 25 almost 30 years ago, 1985, a film was made by a Kenyan filmmaker named Mohammed Amin. And he made a film called African Calvary, The Uncertain Redemption. And in there was about 20 minutes of interviews with the then president of Tanzania, Mwalimu Julius Nyerere. Tanzania at that time was the poorest country in Africa, probably, arguably. And Nyerere talked about the famine that was that time stalking Ethiopia, pretty much all of the Horn of Africa and all the way across the Sahel. And he talked about the necessity to pay attention to smallholder farmers. He said smallholder farmers are our future. He said smallholder farmers and their needs and the infrastructure that they need and the tools that they need and the support they need, that will be our future. That will be our way out of this situation. It's interesting, almost 30 years ago, we're talking the same language. But I would offer you his words that he spoke then. When it looks overwhelming, it looks like nothing is changing. He says, you can be critical, you can be self-critical, you can do all of the right analysis, you can be involved. He said, but don't despair. He said, despair is the unforgivable sin. And I've always remembered that, the despair is the unforgivable sin. We're a people of hope who believe that the kingdom is among us. And so that's what I would leave you with tonight and into the rest of your lives. And so we bring this to a close this evening, and I give thanks to Dr. Ejeta for being here with us, for each of our other guests, some of whom have already left, to panelists, to alumni, to students, to development professionals, to parents. All of you are here. But I have one little thing I want to add first, is that the person who made this happen, consciously, conscientiously, innovatively, by working on this for pretty consistently over the last 6 months, is Chris Wilson. And Chris, I would just like to acknowledge you. Come on up here. So, God bless you, and have a good evening. We'll see you sometime soon.